a modern languages interview normally has a few different parts. There'll often be part that discusses your personal statement and some general conversation about books you've read, either in the language or books that you've read in English for pleasure or at school. And that might also include your interest in the culture of the language you're applying to study. There'll normally be a section in the target language, unless you're applying to do it as a beginner, and in that, that's probably just a few minutes of conversation in the language. In the section that you're about to hear, the applicant is doing another part of the exercise, which is responding to a text that she has read, and in this case it's a text in French, a poem, with a list of vocabulary in English to help her. If you're preparing a text in the target language, you'll normally be given some sort of help with it. So that might be a list of vocabulary, or it could be a bilingual dictionary. In some cases it might even be a translation on the opposite page, so you'd actually have the text and the translation into English. What we're not doing is treating it as a vocab test. We're not looking to see whether you know all the words. We're actually trying to find out whether you can read independently and come to your own conclusions about a text. So it really is about your close reading skills, not about a language exercise as such. You'll normally be interviewed by two people, and in this case it's just me asking the questions with the other person acting as a note taker. So if it's okay now, we'll turn to the poem that you had a look at before. I'm calling this a poem, but I think it's a poem. I imagine you think it's a poem. What about it makes you think it's a poem?
Firstly, if we look at the layout on the stage, the fact that we have essentially 3 quatrains suggests that it's not prose, although prose, you can have prose poetry. And secondly, the rhythm, although there isn't a standardised metre throughout, there is a sense of rhythm and flow, and it's not laid out in the normal way that, for example, prose would be or a play would be, which definitely suggests that it's more of a poem.
Mm-hmm. If we changed the way it's set out on the page and made the lines run on together, so it didn't have those breaks at the end of the line, would it become prose, or is there still something about it that makes it seem like poetry?
There's still something about it that makes it seem like poetry. It's and just the syntax of the sentences, or rather the phrases, because they aren't necessarily full sentences, which makes them seem more like the fact that they're little snippets rather than a full explanation that we might see in a novel or in an article, suggests that it's not supposed to be read as necessarily one sort of cohesive description. It is. You're supposed to take your time with it, analyse each part on its own and see what it evokes in you.
And is there anything in particular that you could highlight that seems to you to be a poetic use of language?
Yes.
A particular example?
It's this, at the start of the second quatrain, the fact that this is isolated on its own, that's really evocative of sort of poetry. Like it's sort of the opening line in any, in most poetic pieces, it's like calling upon the muse, but this time the muse is the country, it's sort of a lament. Like in the Odyssey, it starts with this sort of oh, and then following by the calling upon the muse, so that really, to me, is like a very poetic feature.
And why do you think that particular line is so much shorter than the others? What's the effect of that short line?
I mean, immediately it draws the attention to the line. It stands out, whereas all the other lines are sort of a consistent length, varying in only 1 or 2 syllables between them. Suddenly we have this very short line at the beginning of the second stanza that just really hones it in. It makes as though the author really wants you to pay attention to this, and it changes your perception of the poem as a whole. As in the first in the first quatrain, there's this image of sort of you don't get what you quite expect you're getting, but it's very out of context, it's more general, and then suddenly we get this and then it immediately sort of wants to contextualise what we're talking about here.
So we've talked a bit about the place and the importance of the pays. What about the time? If you had to guess what time of day this is evoking, what time do you think it might be?
I'm imagining, so I'm assuming it's summer, because in the first line it says Siliti, but also it's suggesting to me a time where the world isn't like the day is in transition either into night or the night into day, because we're talking about the lamps being turned off or the lamps decolouring, but also le rouge de la robe, so the dresses being illuminated. So for me, it evokes dawn, but then also with this idea of sève and sommeil, the two being so close together, it's that idea of like sap that comes out in the morning, like morning dew, and sleep just being shaken off.
And who would you say are the characters? Are there particular characters involved, and where do they appear?
I'd say there's sort of two people or characters speaking, although we don't necessarily hear from them until the last quatrain. Because there's the toi and the tu, it suggests that there's also a je, because there must be the poetic je, although he's or she is not mentioned explicitly. It's that very much the statement, or it could be the poem itself talking to the toi, or to the interlocutor, which it creates this division of, or rather this image of there being two people or two parts.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other particular images that you'd like to point out that you particularly liked?
Yeah. I really love this first line, l'arbre vieillit dans l'arbre s'il because firstly, vieillit it's got this very negative connotation. It's when you imagine aging, you think of growing decrepit and weak and cracked, but the image of l'arbre is the complete opposite. It's this idea of strength and age, but in a sense of wisdom and fortitude, and how things grow stronger, or trees grow bigger and stronger throughout their lifetime, and it creates this sort of contrasting image within itself, because we have l'arbre who should be strong, but then by seeing it vieillir, it creates this idea of it becoming weaker, and then also with it being l'été, which we imagine to be like the height of a tree's strength and beauty, because it's all in full flourish, but actually this line's almost suggesting that it's getting weaker in the summer and that it's just closer to death. And
the next line is quite striking, isn't it? It sounds almost like a contradiction. L'oiseau franchit le champ de l'oiseau et s'évade. How can a bird get past in that way its own song?
It's that idea of breaking free of. It's this all like this idea of escaping one's constraints, and it's almost doing the impossible. It flies faster than its song. There's that old tale where the emperor captures a nightingale and keeps it in its cage, and that's when it doesn't sing, but he kept it for its singing, and it's the similar image of the bird can only escape its song, can only move past its song when it's free.
Okay. Thank you.